on to the next speaker. Hello, Justin, and you are muted. Now you're not muted. There you are. Yeah, boy, oh boy, we had an education here, and we are going to get another one with you. Yeah. I looked into you a little bit. We haven't really known each other much in the past, but I looked into you and I really got impressed. And I wrote up a little bit here of an introduction for you, and I'm going to convey that to the listeners, because we really need to open our ears up on this one, because it's going to get deep. Folks, you're going to enjoy the next hour and a half here. We have a teacher with us. Justin Deschamps is here. He has been a truth seeker all his life and has studied physics. Excuse me. Okay. Philosophy and spirituality, and he also speaks on free energy, and he gets into many different areas of the extraterrestrial enigma, the universal life force, and I'm not so sure exactly all of these or where he want to go with this talk, but we are going to be open to all of it. And he takes all of the conglomerate of information, the messages in it, and try to put it into more understandable concepts and forms that can make it easier for us to navigate and understand truth. He makes us better truth seekers. He makes us think, ask questions like, what is truth? I know there's some discussions on that out there, because two people can look at the same concept and come up with two different explanations, and they may both be truth in some form. I don't know if this is explainable to me yet, but you listen to his story and his blog. That is Stillness in the Storm. And it is ongoing conversation about world events, truth, hidden truths, and empowering information. Justin and Julian Robles created SITS, which is like, well, I'll let him explain that. That'll be more directly. So without any more jabber on my part, I give you Justin Deschamps. Welcome here.
Thank you, Augie. Pleasure to be here. Well, yeah, everybody, I'm glad to be here. I've got a lot to talk about and not a lot of time to do it. I'm going to try to pack in about, well, geez, I've already produced about 5 seasons worth of content on this subject on my show, Into the Storm, on edgeofwonder.tv, and there's just so much to share. So I'm going to try to give a practical exposition of this information, because one of the things that I like to offer, and I think it's quite synchronistic that I happen to end up right after Dan Winter, because he's been a big inspiration and a source of information for my life. And so Dan provides a lot of the kind of hardcore science behind how consciousness and matter and things like this interrelate with each other. And so what I'm going to provide is the tools for you to become your own phase conjugate wave and create your own dielectric field that allows you to weave in information. And it's going to work, I think, pretty hand in hand with itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it here. And let me just pull up my notes. So before we do that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I, as Augie was mentioning, founded stillnessinthestorm.com. And the reason I call it Stillness in the Storm, which was something that kind of was thrust onto me when I was trying to come up with the concepts, Julian and I, way back in 2013. It was actually, we had conversations in 2012 about, like, how do we want to do what we wanted to do, which was to share information, just put our voices out there and see, what kind of conversations we could have with people, because we were seeking for a lot of truth. And we had, as you might imagine, I'm sure a lot of people on the who are listening right now know that there's a lot to find when you start seeking for the truth. So how do you make sense of all of it? Well, I discovered that the name Stillness in the Storm And I say discovered because we were trying to come up with a name, and it just flashed into my mind, Stillness in the Storm. I didn't really know exactly what it meant until later on when I was unpacking what I'm about to share with you. And what I'm about to share with you is that within your mind, within your consciousness, within the very fabric of your being itself, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, all the different levels of being that we know of, there is a way to weave all of the information within all of those sources into a coherent narrative. In a lot of ways, you are like a black hole, but a positive black hole. Now, think about if you've ever seen a Masonic pillar before, you have the masculine and feminine, the white and the black. And just for the moment, what I want you to consider is that these ideas are good in their core. The negative forces kind of took over them and hijacked them, but at their core, they're positive. Masculine and feminine is definitely a positive thing. And the black pillar is meant to represent the feminine. Now, you might be saying, why is it black? Well, it's not black because it's bad. It's black because, with respect to light, black absorbs light. If you want to create a material that has the ability to absorb as much light as possible, you're going to use black. And the reason why is because it has the ability to absorb as many photons as possible. So absorption, reception, these qualities are related to the feminine. And that deals with our awareness. Our awareness, when you look at something, you can't help but absorb information about it into your being. Now, once it's been absorbed, it has the ability to be changed and transformed and reorganized by the masculine. And so the masculine, once that force has done its job, so to speak, then you can share it with somebody, and now it becomes light. It's something you emit instead of receive. And so stillness in the storm as an idea is the idea that in life, you're, as an individual, you're running through life trying to figure out, like, what does anything mean? Like, who am I? What am I supposed to do with this body? Like when you're younger, you're running around trying to figure out how your body works and how to like live life. And then later, how to do things in the world socially, and how to be in community with people, how to live in a relationship and have a relationship, how to raise a family, how to provide for yourself, how to deal with the tragedies and trials and challenges and adventures and beauty and bliss of life. Well, how do you do that? Each one of these experiences seems to be unique. Is there a connection between these things? And there is a connection. There is actually a way to weave all this information together into a singular, coherent story, the story of your life, which is a representation of the whole, because you are a fractal representation of the whole. You actually are a spark of divinity. You are made in the image of the creator. And what that basically means is that you have the ability to absorb all this information that's coming into your life. It seems chaotic. It seems like a storm. But then through truth, through openness, through bravery, through wanting to know the truth and seeking the truth with the whole heart and mind, you can create a still point of awareness within yourself. And then you become the stillness of the storm of your own life. And that creates a fractal braiding pattern, to put it in Dan's language, or it creates a system whereby you can become the author of your own life. And sovereignty is directly related to this. The people that have figured this out are the so-called ascended masters, the higher density beings, if we want to get extraterrestrial, or if we want to use religious, because I like to go everywhere. We have, prophets from old, Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Jeremiah, Enoch, all these people who throughout the ages sought the truth profoundly. They were willing to do anything to claim the truth for themselves, including change who they were. But as a result, they became a greater representation of who they truly are, that infinite fractal spiritual essence of who they truly are. And that allowed them to claim this coherent narrative I'm talking about. So what I'm going to be presenting here for you, as best as I can in the short time that we have here, is how you can actually do this for yourself to a certain extent. I'm going to lay out the pieces of how this actually works, and then try to point you in some good directions as far as how you can actually activate this. And there's a lot of things that you're going to hear and see that you might have heard of already. I'll tell you, the forces of darkness have played a really big role in corrupting this information. When I say corrupting, and I don't mean the information is bad, I mean you your thought process, your thought process of it is bad. We've been led to believe that, facing your fears or having to let go of negative emotions or having to let go of things that you had in the past, nostalgia is bad. That having conflict is bad. That facing a situation that is undesirable and making somebody uncomfortable because they're violating your rights and your truth and whatnot, that's bad, and we shouldn't make people uncomfortable. But that's not the case at all. We have to be willing to be brave with the truth, and we have to be willing to be brave to create order out of chaos in our life. That's another phrase that has been kind of corrupted in a lot of people's minds. People, they hear order being made out of chaos, they think about Novus Ordo Seclorum, or they think about the Freemasons, and they're like, oh, the Freemasons are totally bad. And believe me, they're not the best group on the planet. But the core philosophy is a technique of spiritual self-mastery that the powers and the forces that be have claimed for themselves, and they're trying to deny you and us from having it for our own purposes to create a good, happy, and blissful life. So what we need to do is we need to reclaim those treasures and realize that we already have the keys for this in ourselves, in our own consciousness, in our own being. And if we can learn how to do what we already do better, which is to create a coherent narrative, to find and seek for the singular truth within, then there's nothing that we can't do in our own lives with respect to creating bliss, harmony, joy, healing, transcendence of pain, and remaking this world into the spiritual paradise that it was meant to be. So, all right, with that, so to begin this section, what is a coherent narrative? I'm going to liken it to this is a phrase I actually got from Dan Winter. Big fan of his work. He's got a ton of information, y'all. If you can wrap your head around it, it is powerful. And he likens this process in his own way to what is called a scroll work of light. And I'm relating it to a fractal scroll work of light. So let's go through this. Well, ask yourself a connection. What's the connection between prayer, worship, hope, transcendence, bliss, catharsis, dreaming, venting with your friends, myths, legends, and bedtime stories? There's actually a connection behind all of these things and many more. And the connection is it's a coherent narrative. Each one of these techniques is one of the many ways we as humans make sense of our experience by building a coherent intellectual narrative. What do I mean by coherent intellectual narrative? Sounds really fancy and philosophical. Well, basically, we're talking about a singular truth. You are designed, mind, body, and soul, to seek for truth. You always want to make sense of things. And when things don't make sense, things become very uncomfortable, and it stifles you, and it creates trauma, it creates pain. You often develop addictions to deal with it. You avoid reality because it's hard, because there are things out there that you don't understand, and you know that you don't understand them, and you don't know how to understand them, so you avoid them. And that's part of what the fear system is all about. We have 3 responses of fear. We have freeze, flight, and flight. Or I'm sorry, flight and fight. And so freeze is when you're just totally paralyzed. You can't do anything. Flight is when you see that there's something there that you're trying to avoid, and you're like, I'm going this way, and you try to get out of the way. Well, fight is when you face the situation. And when I say fight, I don't mean, being like a bruiser and just like fighting everything in existence. I mean, using bravery, being like, you know what? I don't know what's over there, but I believe in myself. I believe, and I believe that I have the power to face any situation. And with that faith in myself, this is a term that you've probably heard before in religions, then I can do anything. Now, what's interesting is that there is a source, there is a place where you can tap into the ultimate story of existence. There are beings who figured this out long ago. They figured out how to link their mind and body and heart together to create a coherent narrative, to create a singular unified truth. Well, what is that? There is a key technique. And one of the things that almost all the prophets, in my estimation, have come in contact with is a concept of God, a concept of the creator. Now, I want to differentiate that between, the religious, kind of dead, crystallized, formalized concept that tends to push people away from God, and then the actual real, personal, living experience of the creator. They're big different things. The real living personal concept of the creator is something that you're interacting with all the time. I mentioned the word, it's hope and transcendence. Well, as a being, you naturally want to hope for better things. As a matter of fact, when you feel bored and uninterested and you're not really sure what you're going to do with your life, or you're not sure what you're going to do later on that night because you're not sure, there's no plan, you're hoping, you're longing for something better. You're longing for a stimulation, happiness, joy. Maybe you want to see your friends. Maybe you want to have a good meal. Maybe you want to listen to some music. Maybe you want to go on a hike. Maybe you're trying to get out of this crappy job or this bad relationship or this, bad living situation that you're in. And you're always wanting more. You always want better than what you have now. And that experience of wanting better than what you have now, that is your relationship to the true essence of what the creator is. Because the creator is many things, but in this respect, the creator is the goal. We want to get better. We want to ascend. We want to spiritually evolve. We want to become more than we actually are. We want to be supermen and superwomen. We want to be disease-free. We want to be able to face life with happiness and joy, not be worried about something happening and it's putting us in a tailspin of negative emotion. We want to be able to interact with our friends and fellows and our family and our children and our partners and things like this so that we can actually have good experiences with them and know how to navigate all that. Well, that is the hope for wisdom and knowledge, and it's a hope for the promise of being like the creator. The creator is kind of the ultimate superhero. And when people, individuals, whether they're extraterrestrial or whether they are human, when they make contact with that true essence, the true creator concept, as I like to call it, then they are able to transform themselves to unite their dualized nature and they become one. And in a lot of ways, the game of life is the many becoming one. For you in your life, this is the whole thing I was talking about earlier about stillness in the storm and knowledge. Like, there's all sorts of experiences you're having in life and you will have in life that seem to be disconnected. Like, how is this horrible accident I saw on the side of the road connected to this beautiful joy of holding a child in my arms for the first time, or caring for an animal that I really love, or looking longingly in my partner's eyes, or hiking on the mountain in the morning and hearing the birds chirp? What is the connection? Well, the interesting thing is there is a connection. There's a way to connect everything together. And when you know how to connect everything together using your philosophic mind, because it requires an act of will, then you will make contact with that force of divinity. Divinity, when we think about the concept of divinity, what we're talking about is the interconnectedness of things. How do things that seem separate, how are they actually connected? How is everything unified? How is everything made whole or holy? Well, when you possess a true concept of God or the creator in your mind, then that itself acts like a key, a cipher, a way to weave all this information together into a unified, coherent, organized field. And the people who've done that, we know of as prophets, and people like Jesus or Padmasambhava, who is the Buddhist who became the rainbow body, like he pioneered the whole rainbow body technique, and various other groups. I mean, there's a substance that, like I'm saying, there's a truth to this idea of the creator. And it's the thing that allows you to interconnect everything. How are time and space related? How is the past connected to the future? How is your emotions biochemically using pheromones and hormones and various other types of neurotransmitters like epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol? How are these things connected to the energy that you feel at any time you're looking at a beautiful flower or you're worried about what you're going to encounter when you go to work that day? Well, it's consciousness. It's the truth, the singular truth. So the idea that we are making the many become one is the same idea of spiritual growth and spiritual ascension. So when we say intellectual, when we're talking about creating an intellectual narrative, we're talking about information. So when I say intellectual, I want you to think, oh, he's just talking about, the brain and the mind. And I don't like mind and brain. I'm a heart emotion person. Well, in your heart and emotions, there is information, there's data there, there's insights, there's awareness, there's things like this. And so the information is the kind of currency, the thing that all of the various aspects of our being use to exchange and formulate different aspects of themselves. So the great adventure, the challenge of challenges, the purpose of life is to use our free will, our attention, our mind and emotions and body to create the already completely unified infinite truth that exists all around us within our own mind and consciousness. So the truth, if you think about it, it's unified. You know, Augie was talking about in the beginning, how is it that two people can see the same thing and be like, well, you know, from this perspective, it looks like the mug has nothing on it, right? There's only black here and a handle, but from this side, there's something here. Well, if you're sitting in, if you're looking at the mug from your perspective, it looks like there's something here. From my perspective, there's only blackness. There's nothing here. It seems like these truths are disconnected. Well, they are in a sense because as human beings, we possess a finite mind. This is one of the miracles of existence. The creator is infinite, an infinite, absolute, interconnected, eternal reality, an infinite being, a being that existed before the universe was even created and existed from the beginning of the universe, exists now from the eternal past to the present, and then into the eternal future. So we as finite beings, we are not that. We are made from that, but we are not that. And so this is one of these things that, with respect to understanding some of the truths that we need to understand to get how the game works, we have to accept this. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Justin, I'm an infinite being, I'm a soul, I'm a spirit reality too. And yes, you are. But the part of the adventure is that your spirit self, that infinitely perfect part of yourself, what I call the higher self, chose of its own accord to come into the creation, just like the creator decided to create the creation, to experience something, to experience the process of making the many become one. And so you are participating in that adventure. And we do that through free will and choice. We actually decide to participate in that by acknowledging our experiences and weaving them together. You know, to go back to this mug analogy real quick, how is it that these two perspectives can become one? Well, if you're only focusing on your own personal experience and you refuse to take another person's perspective, if you refuse to empathize with them, if you refuse to see through their eyes and put yourself in their experience, then you won't see what they see. You'll only see what you see. And this is what happens to a lot of people. This is what's really interesting. Ironically, this is something that I discovered with my psychology research, because I am like the kind of person, I don't just like to have an insight. I like to have the insight come in my mind. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. But then I try to look elsewhere in the world to see if maybe other people have had the insight too. And maybe they've thought of things that I didn't think of. And turns out that's usually the case. Like almost everything you've ever thought of at some level, at the core, there's probably someone else out there who's also thought of this too. And one of the things I discovered is that your emotions, while they tell you a lot about many things, they really tell you the most about you and your life and what you're feeling and you're experiencing. You can't empathize in the sense that with mirror neurons, which is right in the behind the neocortex, in between the midbrain, there's this thing called the insular cortex. That's where the most mirror neurons are located. So when you're empathizing with somebody, that part of your brain, the insular cortex, is firing up like crazy. And that'll give you an impression of what another person's feeling, but you can't really truly feel and know absolutely everything that they know unless you speak, unless you communicate with them. And that requires the willingness to see. When you do that, then you can hear their perspective, and then you can see that although you can see that there's an image on the surface here, I can see through your eyes what you see now, and you can see what I see, which is the backside of the thing, the mug. And then that's how, through our separate perspectives and experience, the many can become one. So when you're willing to receive information from somebody else, when you're willing to put yourself in their shoes and listen to their experience and recognize all of the things that they have to offer you and get into communion with them, communication, and be open-minded and use your words, then you can literally start to see through their eyes and gain the truth that they've accumulated in their life. And this is part of the miracle, I think. This is part of the beauty of existence, is that the creator put a little piece of himself. I like to refer to the creator as male. You can do whatever you like to it, refer to it as whatever you like. but the creator put a piece of himself in all of us. And that perspective is limited intentionally. It's limited because we get to participate in the joy of experiencing life through another person's eyes. But if we don't want to, we don't have to. So how is it that free will and this kind of infinite awareness meet with each other? Well, it's law and rights. You have the rights to your own sovereignty over your own mind, body, and soul. I can't just through telepathy force myself into your mind and start to see your private experience, because that would violate your right to privacy, nor can you do the same to me. What we actually have to do is we have to speak to each other. We have to be willing to engage in what I call intellectual intimacy. And there's 3 types of intimacy with a hidden fourth. There's intellectual, there's emotional, and there's physical intimacy. And when you share intellectual intimacy, it's all of the data, the information that is the majority of the things that you're experiencing. Like I can get a lot from you physically about how you're acting with your body language, which will probably tell me about how you feel. And your feelings are a whole lot of information too, like whether you like something, whether you don't like it, you're going to like, if you're drinking some drink that you just got that you've never tried before, and you take a sip and you're like, you make a face, you're going to communicate whether you like it or not. But it's not going to it's not going to reveal the full breadth of all the information you're experiencing in that moment. If I really want to know, I have to ask you, I have to open the door of communication. And that's where the intellectual, the information that is very refined and detailed comes through. So you can think about the difference between emotions and the mind, the intellect, as an emotion is like a set of colors that express something, but it's not really heavily detailed. The intellect is like all the details that are wrapped up in that. And then when you take the two together, you form a complete picture, you form a complete whole. And so that's part of how the many become one in social relationships. We have to be willing to talk to each other. We have to be in communion with each other, in relationship with each other, in community with each other. And the best relationships that you can imagine have that ability to share the truth. And one of the things that I discovered in my work several years ago is the power of contracts. There's 3 things that I think are very important for this process I'm talking about: the great adventure of spiritual growth, the great adventure of becoming one with your higher self. And I say that there's philosophy. Philosophy is the kind of the main motor behind how we interpret meaning. So when I say philosophy, I don't mean like, just thinking about, Pluto or Socrates, which are fascinating philosophers, but I mean you as somebody who is constantly sifting through meanings in your life is using philosophy all the time. When you pick up your phone and somebody sends you a funny GIF and you're like, what does that mean? That question, what does that mean? Guess what? You're engaging in philosophy. You're trying to figure out what something means. And what we want to do is we often want to discover the truth, right? Well, the truth is a meaning. The opposite of truth is falsehood, which is not truth. And so when you're using philosophy, you're trying to figure out what something means. Is it true or is it false? But you're also trying to figure out if it's valuable. Is this drink that you've just had, is this something you value, you love, and you want more of? The truth of it, you're going to experience by drinking it and consuming it and exposing yourself to it. And all the information that's contained in there, which you don't have access to because it's in your unknown, now will become known to you, and you can absorb it, which happens in the right brain or the feminine brain, which is receptive. And then after you've become aware of what that is, then you can evaluate it. You can decide, well, do I like this or do I not like it? Is this something that I want more of and I want to figure out a way to build as a part of my life plan, my kind of life story? Or do I want to avoid it and not have any more of it? Well, that's the evaluation part of it. And so we're constantly using philosophy to intake information, figure out what it is, and then with that, figure out what we want to do with it. And so that's philosophy. The next big thing is psychology. And psychology I've expanded to mean basically how do you as a being work. When I say psychology, I don't mean like Sigmund Freud or anything like that, although he certainly contributed his perspective. What I mean is that it's the question of how do you as a being work? How does your mind, body, and soul machine or beingness work, if you prefer? Well, that's the study of psychology, this what I call spiritual psychology. How does the creator spark, that infinite spark of awareness that's within your own beingness, use your brain and mind as a physical, biological part of your meat suit to affect your heart and emotions, and then affect all your DNA, your body, and how does that all relate to other people that we're in relationship with, and we're in relationship with the cosmos and the universe. How does all that work? Well, that's what I call spiritual psychology. So you got philosophy, you have spiritual psychology, and then the last one is law. Law gets a bad rap in a lot of ways. People often think of it as, boring. It's the legal codes. There's these laws that told me I had to wear a mask and I don't want to wear a mask. That these laws that, I had to deal with a traffic ticket last week, and man, I don't want to deal with traffic tickets. Well, that's part of the law, and the law is a massive topic. We could probably talk for like 10 hours on easily, but with respect to what I'm saying is the law is the rules for how the universe was created. The universe was created to be a free place where all embodiments of the creator, who is sovereign, and us as the children of the creator, can try to play the game of life, to participate in the grand adventure, as I like to say. Well, how are we going to do this? How, if my free will is truly sovereign and protected, if free will is truly the highest law in existence, which it is, how is it that my free will can be honored and your free will can be honored at the same time? Well, that's what law and rights are. So if you think about it like a game, you are playing the game. There is a certain set of things that your player in the game came with. If you're a video game person, your standard role-playing RPG type game is like this, or a first-person shooter game. You got a gun and you're walking around shooting things, or you're participating in some like fantasy world, like Final Fantasy or something like that. If you're not familiar with video games, think about it like Dungeons and Dragons, if you're familiar with that. There is a game master who created the universe that your player, that you've taken the time to create, is going to interact with other players to do things. If you're not familiar with those two, don't worry, I got one for you too. Sport. Most people are familiar with sports. All the players in a sports game, if you think about baseball or basketball, each player has a specific task, a role that they're supposed to do. And when they do it well and they follow the rules, then they can continue in the game. If you break the rules, then you can't play in the game. So law is very simply the rules of existence. So when you use your philosophy to seek for the truth and figure out how you work as a being, your spiritual psychology, then you often encounter the law, which is the rules of existence that tell you how to play the game of life. And with all of those things, you can develop the coherent narrative, the coherent story. So this is the thing that we use to create basically the blueprint of our lives that ensures that we can live a fulfilling life, and we can also ensure that we live a fulfilling life with other people in a way that makes us all feel more free. And that's part of what, the truth is all about. That's the creator, the God concept is more than just, in the beginning there was, God, and the word was God, things like this. That's part of it, but it's more than that. It's infinitely more than that. It's the source and destiny of all life. It's also the way that you personally can live your life. I mean, the creator and set up the universe in such a way that it's as if literally all of existence was created specifically for you as the player in that existence to try to figure out how you're going to live your life. There's all these beings and aspects of reality that are all around you trying to help you, to get you to think about that choice that you're making, or to absorb that information and really allow, play with it and think about what it means, philosophy. And then what are you going to do with it? Are you going to do the highest ideal, or are you going to, just do what you want and maybe hurt somebody in the process, which is going to take their freedom and give it to you, but in a way that's not going to create harmony, it's going to create suffering. So all of that kind of explains the basic rules and the basic components, we might say, of how this unfolding question I'm going to be unpacking for you is, well, what is fractal consciousness, and how does that help the many become one? Well, there's only one way we know of to represent all the information in reality in one form, and that's a fractal. So let's focus on ourselves. How are all the ideas and experiences and longings and desires and whatnot that you have ever encountered in your life, how are they all connecting together? Well, the answer to that is a fractal. Now, I'm sure I didn't get to see all of Dan's presentation, but in his work, Dan Winter talked a lot about fractals. And one of the beautiful things about a fractal is that it has the ability to link all these things together. So the infinite human mind is finite, as we said, and a fractal is the way that we can create or recreate the infinite truth within a single limited form. So you think about this. If the truth is infinite, how do you take something that's infinite and put it into something that's finite? You might be wondering, like, man, that's crazy, Justin. How can you possibly do that? Well, it's not actually crazy. Mathematicians have known for a long time that it's absolutely possible. For example, think about the number pi. If you think about the number pi, it's called an irrational number. There's many irrational numbers, actually. The golden mean ratio, which is another really cool number, or phi, the phi ratio, is also an irrational number. It's a number that pi is 3.14159.265. Phi is 161.309.968, I believe. And it keeps going, though, and it never repeats itself. So within that number, that irrational number, you have an endless string. There's no way to perfectly represent the infinite string of numbers that are in pi or in phi or any irrational number within a single string of numbers. It goes on forever. But wait, there's more. With the power of a fractal, you can actually take all of the information that is in a data set and put it into a limited and finite form. And now it can't be contained totally, but as time goes on, as moments pass from one moment to another, you can actually do this. So here, let me pull up an illustration for you, and I'll show you what I mean here. Let me share my screen. If I can, I think I should be able to. Yeah, okay. So here we go. So if you look at this, we have the typical Star of David, and as it's a GIF. So each iteration, you have a moment in time. I'm going to use this as an analogy. So each time that the GIF changes, it's as if another moment in time has happened. And now all that information can be stored inside the fractal. So what is actually happening here? Well, if you look at the fractal, when it first starts, you have this triangle. It adds another triangle, and each moment it keeps adding these triangles to the outer edge. And each one of those outer edge triangles is what's called a fractal iteration. And that can keep going on forever. So within this shape, the shape that can fit on my computer screen, that you're looking at my computer screen right now, on your computer screen, you can fit an infinite amount of information. When I say infinite, and there's a kind of a little nuance there, but it's well nigh infinite, because true infinity has total limitlessness with respect to numerosity and cardinal numbers and things like this. But with respect to information, with respect to your human experience, your life begins, you have a beginning, and then even after this life, that endless progression of experience never stops. And for all intents and purposes, the soul acts as a recording device for all of the information in your being. And it uses fractal geometry to do that, to store that information. Now, what's interesting is one of the things that Dan Winter discovered is that through fractal fields, you can actually take the information within a bioelectric field, which your body is producing a bioelectric field, by the way, which we'll get into in a little bit, and you can actually store that information. Now, the brain is the thing that creates the pattern. So if your brain and your mind is in fear land, if it's in freeze or flight, then you can't actually take the information that's happening outside of you and do anything with it. You know, this is psychologically, when we think about trauma, how is trauma actually created? How do people experience trauma? Well, it's because you're having an experience that you don't know how to make sense of. And when that happens, the part of your brain that deals with the information processing, which is in the forebrain and the neocortex, that part shuts down. So here, as a matter of fact, I'm going to stop my screen real quick. Let me pull up a visual if I can. of this. It's really cool. Okay, yeah, this will be a good demonstration. Hold on one second. Now, just ignore for the time being the names here. I just want you to focus on this big part of the diagram. I don't know if you can actually see my mouse, but I'll be descriptive with my words here. So the way that the brain works is the brain is the physical part of your soul, you might say. Now the heart is a big part of it too, of course, but with respect to the place that you have the most choice over. When you think about free will, as I said before, free will is the way that we get to participate in this grand adventure. How does information get organized in your brain and your consciousness? Well, it's through free will. Free will is the most active in the part of the brain that's above the eyes. It's called the forebrain or the neocortex. That's where meaning is generated. That's where philosophy takes place. That's where the right brain and the left brain start to work together in a big way. Now, what's interesting is that your right brain is the part of your brain that, if you don't know this, your right brain, there's a switch that happens. So your right brain actually controls the left hand and the left side of your body, and your left brain actually controls the right hand. So the part of you that's more active, as a matter of fact, there's more right-handed people than left-handed people. And part of the idea behind that is that when you're doing things, when you're in the masculine aspect of your life, you're doing things in the world, you're taking action, you're producing. Remember the analogy of light and darkness. Light is, or the color white, I guess color, not necessarily color, but white is emission, light emission. It doesn't absorb light as well as black. Black absorbs light and things like this. And so it relates to masculine and feminine. Now, your right brain is the feminine part of your brain. It's the receptive part. And when you're experiencing something new, that feminine part wants to take over. When you're a child, your right brain is very active, because you don't know anything. And from a body perspective, from a consciousness perspective, I mean, I know we talk about how souls and they know everything, and absolutely, that's 100% true. But when you're incarnated in the physical, your soul is starting to work with your body, and you're really creating something new that has never been created before. It's the mind-body interaction, what I like to call the soul mind or the body mind. And so when you're playing as a child, you're in this state of play, which is often a right brain activity, and you're taking the world in and you're trying to make sense of, what is this flower I just found in the ground? What is this dirt I'm seeing on the ground? What is this tree that I'm looking at? You're looking at these things, you're trying to figure out what it is and identify it. And that's all a right brain activity. Once you've figured out that it's a tree and you objectify it, meaning you turn it into a kind of conceptual representation in your mind, then it goes and lives in the left brain. And that's where a lot of information is stored. And after a while, when you're like maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years old, now you're like, well, I know what that thing is with those branches and those green leaves. That's a tree. But what can I do with that? Maybe I can make a tree house. Maybe I can climb the tree. Maybe I can put a rope from the tree and swing in the tree. Well, that's an active force. And so when the right brain is doing is it's absorbing information, it's trying to identify newness. And the left brain is taking those items that have been accumulated and then putting them in data stores of information and knowledge that we call knowledge. And once you have enough of it, then you can actually do things in the world. So it's this constant inner-outer experience and happening. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why the creator is often put into the masculine, they call him God, or they call God a him, is because God is the ultimate light source, the ultimate source of information. So that's also why we often refer to God as the father of lights, or a masculine concept, because it's emanating information. The creator is unchanging, and in the sense that the creator exists in a state of kind of sublime perfection, you might say. And so it's just radiating truth and information and all this kind of stuff out. The point here is that your right brain is the feminine part. You receive the truth from your body, your experience. When you willingly choose to accept the truth, then that allows you to look at the thing that you're experiencing. Let's use a tree analogy. And you're looking at this tree. Maybe the first time you see a tree when you're 1.5 years old, you're like, whoa, I don't know what the heck to make of this big green, brown thing that's huge and seems to be taking up all of my field of vision. But after time, you face the fact that you don't know it. It's playful. You use good cheer and happiness and joy to do it. And now you identify this object and now you can do something with it. And so you receive the masculine influence of the truth. So the truth is kind of like the seed of God or the creator into your right brain. That right brain is the feminine part of you that creates knowledge, or the masculine. So in a lot of ways, the masculine is your internalized representation of the outside world in the left brain. Okay. So what does this have to do with bravery and truth and making the many become one? Well, in your brain, and this is the reason I brought up this diagram, you have the front brain. The front brain is where meaning gets stored. The midbrain, that's the kind of part you see where it's red and then blue underneath that. That's the midbrain. Oh, it says midbrain right there. And then the back of the brain, that's the cerebrum, and that's the part of the brain where a lot of motor function happens, but it's also where the hindbrain is. So there's a lot of like instinctual reactions. We're going to focus on the midbrain and neocortex interaction. So at the base, the bottom where it says vertebral arteries, I want you to think about the source of information. 99.99% of all the information that's funneling into your brain is coming up from the brainstem. Almost all of it. The only two places where it's not is the olfactory bulb, which is where you smell. There's a lot of information that goes directly from your olfactory bulb and your nasal cavity straight into the back of the brain, or the midbrain, and your visual center, your eyes. The optic nerve actually goes straight into your brain. But for all intents and purposes, most of the information comes in through the brainstem. And now what's interesting is those places I just mentioned that don't, they still have to go through the midbrain. So the midbrain is kind of like the hub, the epicenter. It's like the grand central station of information. So you think about life, you're walking around, there's birds chirping, there's cars driving by, your phone's vibrating, you're trying to figure out where you're going to go that day for work. There's all this information that's constantly swimming through you. What are you going to do with it? How does it actually work? Well, it flows in through your body, through your senses, and then it all gets channeled up to the midbrain here, the central point. And you have to decide, well, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to face this information that's been thrust in front of me and do something with it? Am I going to figure out a life plan? How am I going to get to work that day? I'm going to use an analogy here. Let's say you woke up, you've got work that day, but you also got to, see your friends when you got off of work, and you need to go shopping because you don't have food to hang out with your friends. So you got things that need to happen, and there are choices that need to be made. Well, if what you try to do basically is you take that raw information and you face it. You use the fight response, the bravery response, and there's something called the xiphoid nucleus, which takes that information. And once you've decided, I'm going to face this, I'm going to playfully, ideally, look at this challenge that's in front of me of how I'm going to get to work and how I'm going to plan this dinner date with my friends. And I'm going to figure out a way to organize it into a coherent narrative, into a plan that I can follow to choose to make steps and actions on, so I know that I can get the results I want. Well, that happens in the xiphoid nucleus. And when you use bravery to do that, it takes all that information in the midbrain and it funnels it up to the neocortex, which is right behind the eyes, just above the eyes right here, the forebrain. It's to the right in my image here. And you can actually do something with it. You can organize it into a way that you can create a plan. Now, if you don't do that, if you wake up in the morning and you're like, man, I don't want to see my friends. I don't want to go to work. My boss is a jerk. My back hurts. I'm not feeling good. There's like 1,000,001 different excuses or problems or, valid problems. I don't mean excuses like, they're trite or trivial. I mean, they're problems that maybe you haven't figured out how to face yet, or there are things you're dealing with. And those are also in your head. So not only do you have this challenge of how to get to work on time and how to plan dinner date, but you also got your aches and pains to worry about. You got the fact that you didn't spend the day before cleaning your house because you wanted to hang out with maybe some other friends. And now you got that challenge to try to work into the plan. So there's all this information that needs to get organized. If you have a freeze or flight response, then you'll try to escape the truth that's within your own consciousness, within your own brain. And what's interesting here is when that happens, all of that information that would normally go to the neocortex, the forebrain, the right-hand side of the image here, and you would use to create a coherent plan, a beautiful piece of action and art, you might say, for your life. Instead, it's going to sit in the amygdala and the hippocampus, and that's the part of the, you can't see them here on this image, but those are the parts of the brain that deal with fear. Now, the amygdala is a powerful fear organ. It's in charge of a bunch of different things, but basically it's in charge of threat. And when you are in a freeze or flight state, which are the two states that prevent you from creating a coherent plan and making the many of your information soup becoming one, then you experience anxiety, you experience trauma, you experience that kind of like crippling, I don't know what's going to happen. I've just given myself a migraine. Now my back hurts way more than I thought. Anxiety that makes you want to withdraw from life. So if you're in that situation, then you've woken up, it's this day that you've got to go to work, you've got to have this beautiful life plan, but you don't know what you're going to do. And so as a result, you just sit in bed. You're like, you know what? I'm going to escape life. I'm going to run from life. I'm going to flight from life by hitting snooze on my alarm and going to sleep. And, I'll just figure it out in 10 minutes. That's a response that happens to a lot of us in the modern world. And, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, man, Justin, you're being really harsh, or like, a lot of people deal with this, the world's crazy. And, you're absolutely right. We have been denied these basic life skills from the powers that be. Are in many cases, and no offense to anybody, but our parents didn't teach us this because they weren't taught this and they didn't know. And so there's this essential life wisdom that we have been denied as a species because it makes us easier to control. And there's a certain group of people that want the basic aspects of life to become so monumentally hard to deal with that we spend most of our lives trying to just focus on that and never develop a coherent life plan and narrative that we all could develop so we could all become like Patmos and Baba and Jesus and various other prophets. So when you're in a free state is very similar, like I said, to flight, except it's actually worse, because instead of hitting the snooze, now you're sitting there paralyzed with fear. You're in a state that's so traumatically anxiety provoking that you start to disconnect from reality itself. And unfortunately, there are people who have to deal with this problem, a lot more people than we would like, especially in the modern world. But there are various types of mental illness that are associated with this. On the extreme end, we have psychosis and schizophrenia. Part of what's happening with these mental conditions that also are, just let me list them off, I suppose. We have borderline personality disorder. We have dissociative personality disorder, which is also the multiple personality disorder that used to be the name before they changed the name. And you have narcissistic personality disorder. All these various types of mental illness, for the most part, come from one central source. Almost every type of mental or emotional anxiety, whether it's overeating or whether it's schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder or abusive disorders, or you name it, every type of mental problem you can imagine all comes down to basically one thing, which is you don't know how to deal with the truth of life. And which also means the benefit there is that if you have a way to deal with the truth of life, if you have a way to make the chaos of your life, the storm of your life, find stillness and then weave a coherent narrative therefrom, then you can tackle anything you can imagine can be at your disposal. And so I'll stop the screen share there. And now let's put it back here. I'll continue on with what I was going to share. So basically, what we're talking about here is you want to use a coherent narrative. You want to figure out what the life plan of your life is going to be. Like, what are the challenges in your life? I relate this a lot to the hero's journey. And if you look at a lot of, whether it's spiritual works or not, you can find a good blueprint for this. So one thing I want to say here about this is there's a lot of places to get this blueprint from. You don't have to go to, the Bible. You don't have to go to an extraterrestrial account. You can use all those sources. You can even go to comic books. You can go to the movies, believe it or not. Even Hollywood has to put this stuff in there for a reason, because most of the time you wouldn't care about the movie if they didn't have this hero's journey woven into it. So there are like almost 1,000,001 places you can imagine to pull this guiding narrative and this inspiration for facing the challenges of life from. It doesn't really matter where you get them from. What matters is that you start to use it and incorporate it into your life as much as possible. And so what we're basically talking about is guidance and inspiration from a role model. Now, I think there are a lot of good places. The one that personally I chose many years ago, I was really trying to wrap my head. I was an atheist for many years. I went to school for physics, as you might have heard before. I think they mentioned it yesterday in the panel. And I was like a scientism thumping atheist for many years. I was the kind of guy who was going to like totally debunk your sense of spirituality, until I had my own spiritual awakening. And I'm like, boy, was I wrong. And without going to the nitty gritty of how I got there, the point is I encountered a couple works that had a really profound effect on my life. Now, it's not that these are the best and everything else is inferior. Again, it doesn't really matter where you get this from. What matters is that it has an important meaning for your life and you're trying to do something with it. And so the sources that really I encountered were conversations with God. Is when I was really starting to figure out, like, is there really a creator and what is this thing? So I was really kind of curious about all this. And the Law of One was a big influence for me, and the Urantia book, particularly the story of Jesus' life in the Urantia book. That story in particular continues to be a really big source of inspiration for me. So there's, like I said, there's a bunch of different places you can go. But the basic essence of all these stories, as far as I've been able to tell, was beautifully encapsulated in the work by Joseph Campbell called The Hero's, I believe it's called The Hero's Journey. And it's the idea that there is a journey that we're all part of. I mean, if you think about it, like, we go from being these infinite, like, higher self souls that know all, and we are perfect spiritual beings. And then we come into the physical and we're like totally helpless babes who can barely see, we can't eat, we need our mother and our parents to do everything. And, that's a pretty stark contrast if you can think about it. It creates what I've been able to describe as a kind of a sense of cosmic abandonment. Now, you might be wondering, like, why would that be a good thing? Well, it's important because from a hero journey perspective, the hero's journey is all about, the hero is, life seems perfect and great, and then something happens and their perfect and great life just slowly starts to fall apart because now they've been thrust into the seat of adventure. Now they've got to go out and face this dragon or defeat this bad guy, and they don't know if they can do it because they're nescient. They're in the womb of the village, so to speak. And there's that moment when you're a child often, but it sometimes can happen much later in life, where you are thrust into a situation where you don't have the comforts you normally have. And you really have to test your resolve. Are you going to face this challenge, this unknown situation? Initiation, more in the study of anthropology, that's the word I'm looking for, anthropologically, there's all these initiation rites. Men and women have these initiation rites, particularly men. And there's a reason why male figures tend to be in the hero role. Not to say that women aren't heroes. As a matter of fact, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that's not true at all. Women are like extreme examples of heroic behavior. We just don't necessarily, possess a mainstream society that tends to give credence to that. Not truly. So with respect to men have a specific feature in their psychology that requires them to willingly, of their own choice, face unknown challenges. And they often rely on the master, the chief of the tribe, the father figure, the elderly brother, the brotherhood, who takes that child of 12, 13, 14, 15. In some cultures, they do this. One culture in particular, I forget the name of it, but there's an initiation rite. And what it's all about is the child learning how to let go of their support from their mother and parents and tribe, where they've had all their needs met, and willingly go into an unknown situation to try to realize that within them is the courage and the resources and the bravery and the intelligence and the tenacity and the conviction they have to conquer everything you can imagine. And so they take this boy and they'll bring him into a cave, And the cave is like, you know, they walk down into the cave where it's like pitch black, and the boy has to spend as much time as he can. And I think it was like 24 hours was the initiation. And the boy goes into the cave, total blackness, and he has to sit in the cave. And as you can imagine, there's like bats flying around. There's probably, you know, all sorts of things in the cave, and it's a freaky experience. Well, what often happens is that first the initiation is all about the elders of the tribe who've already gone through this ritual, giving them the tools that they need to be like, hey, the encouragement, like, hey, you know, you're going to go into the situation and it feels scary, but don't worry, you've got it. And then with that, those tools, which is a story or a part of the coherent narrative, now they can go into this unknown situation with a kind of shield and a sword, conceptually anyway, emotionally, conscious, with the tools of consciousness. And with this, use these things to face their own fears. And when they come out of it, now they are stronger and more powerful as a result. So that's one of the aspects of male initiation. In our current world, we don't have a lot of male initiation because the powers that be, want men to be kind of weak, flaccid, incapable, non-leader-like, non-brave, non-heroic men for a lot of different reasons. Women have a kind of built-in initiation in a lot of different ways. The parenting and child experience is a kind of built-in initiation. But in a lot of other ways, women have to deal with all sorts of various types of initiation because they have a specific type of psychology that is much more tactile and emotional and energetic. And so they're constantly having, you know, very powerful information-rich experiences that if you don't have that masculine order-making component within themselves, it can create a lot of trauma and whimsicalness and disorder that often can last for the rest of their lives if they're not careful. So men and women both have this capacity for heroism. And when we as individuals reach for an example of that heroism, which, as I mentioned before, there's many sources for this, then we can use that example and derive a lot of benefit from it. So stepping out of the kind of masculine male and female component of it, I'm just speaking in general, the story of, let's see if I can use what is an example. Well, this is a really good story. Frodo and the Lord of the Rings is a really good example of this story. So how is Frodo, who's been, you know, in the Shire for most of his life, and for those of you who know, I'll try to be as descriptive as possible. You know, it's a story of a young, uninitiated man who becomes aware of the fact that he's got this really intense evil that has been in his family's possession, this evil ring, for a generation. His uncle, Bilbo, found this ring, not knowing what it was. And it turns out that this ring is the kind of source of a very dark evil's power in the world. And if this ring falls into the hands of this evil power that's searching for it, then the whole world will be thrown into darkness. And so Frodo, through the instruction of an elder named Gandalf, who represents the source of this coherent narrative, the source of guidance and wisdom, tells Frodo, hey, listen, you know, you have an opportunity here. Now, what's interesting is if you actually look at the way Gandalf interacts with Frodo, he's never forcing Frodo to do anything. He's just saying, hey, you're a lot more powerful than you think. You've got a really good opportunity here to do amazing things and to help yourself and the world in the process and leave an amazing and give a very important gift of making the world a better place to the world. What do you want to do with it? And if you accept this mission, it's going to challenge you in ways that you never thought were possible, but you have it within you to conquer each one of these challenges and grow profoundly as a result. And so at each stage of this journey, Frodo first has to face the fact that he even has this mission in front of him. He's like, denies it. He doesn't want to do it. He tries to give the ring to Gandalf, and the Gandalf, he can't take the ring. And that what that represents metaphorically is that Gandalf, being the representation of the ideal spiritual force, the spiritual prophet, you might say, the Buddha, the Krishna, the Jesus, the positive extraterrestrials that can't come down here and rescue us themselves because we're here and we need to do that. They can't take the ring, or he can't take the ring, Gandalf. He has to have Frodo take the ring. So we are Frodo. We're the ones who don't really know what we're going to do. How are we going to face these challenges? I don't have the knowledge and the wisdom and the belief and the ages of experience that you have, Gandalf, because Gandalf's like this ancient being who's existed for thousands of years and has all these magical powers and things. How is Frodo going to take the ring and go to, Mordor, which is this place where the ring was created, right in the heart of darkness, and cast it into the lake of fire and destroy the ring? Like, that's the mission that has been put before him. How is he going to do that? Well, in our own lives, how are we going to do that? Everybody has some story of trauma, an issue in their own life. Like, your parents didn't love you enough. You were abused by somebody in your life. Your school system was horrible, and they didn't really encourage your creative spirit, and they probably killed it. Your friends and family, because they were in school, were abusive too, and they didn't really nurture your spirit, and you had those mean girls or bullies in school that were constantly squashing you and preventing you from living up to your full potential. You dated somebody right after you got out of high school or when you were in high school, and they crushed your spirits. And so it's just, your life is just like this tapestry of less than ideal events. I don't know about you, but it's not my life has been this just like parade of amazing fun and adventure and ease. Quite the contrary. So the metaphor here is, how are you going to, no matter, despite the fact that these things in your life have happened, how are you going to take the mission of greatness upon yourself? Are you going to put the cloak of heroism on you, and with the sword of truth and an open-minded heart as a shield, how are you going to walk through life and face these challenges with faith in yourself, even though you don't know if you're going to conquer the challenges ahead? Well, you do it because you have this guidance from Gandalf. You do it because you have this, like I was mentioning in the beginning, the truth of the God concept. And the truth of the God concept we often deal with in myths and legends. So one of the reasons myth and legends existed for most of human history, and this is also beautifully reflected in Joseph Campbell's book, Hero of a Thousand Faces. I misspoke earlier. I said it was The Hero's Journey. The Hero's Journey came out of that. It's The Hero with a Thousand Faces is his book. Fantastic book. I definitely suggest checking it out. And what we learn and discover is that myths and legends are actually a kind of way of dramatizing or exaggerating various types of life lessons within a story. Because, when you're 4, 5, 6 years old, you don't really care about life wisdom because you're 4, 5, or 6 years old. You want to have fun and play. So what's a good way to teach a young person about these things? Well, it's through story. One of the reasons why these stories and even fables from old tend to have a kind of dark element to them, especially from modern eyes, we look at it and like, man, there's like really crazy stuff happening. That would scare the heck out of a kid. Well, it wasn't to scare the kid necessarily. You got to remember the context. And the context was essentially the idea, although, the ancients didn't do it perfectly, but the idea was that childhood is not about like making things all fun and adventure and bliss and happiness. So that way, when you grow up now, the stark contrast between your happy childhood life and the sheer reality of life is so striking and difficult that you're like, man, screw this, I'm out of here, which is kind of what we've been doing to our kids in the modern age. The whole point of that early experience was to teach you through story and example, and you as a parent, your very essence itself is an example of heroism, because hopefully you've conquered some type of challenges in your own life that you can teach your children that. And we, as a community, we teach our children that. And that's kind of the idea, is that there's this guiding role. So Gandalf, going back to the Lord of the Rings, the character of Gandalf represents the ultimate source of experiential wisdom, you might say. The guy who's seen a lot of adventures, had a lot of battles, knows about a lot of things, and it can help you every step of the way to face the challenges that you don't know how to face. And so what ends up happening in the story is that Frodo does. He takes the ring. He's initially unsure. And the whole first book, The Fellowship of the Ring, is all about him really coming to terms with what the mission actually means. And the symbolic allegory in that book is that in order to become who you are meant to be, the infinite higher self, you have to be willing to let go of who you are now. Because your childlike self, it's not that it dies in the sense that you become this hardened, soul that could care less about fun and play and all that. No, it's a rebirth process. It's that, you know, when you're a child, when you don't know how to make sense of the world, when things seem chaotic, when you don't have the ability to create that inner still point of awareness and form a coherent narrative, things are kind of crazy and you're immature, and you know, it's easy for you to make a lot of mistakes. But eventually you stop relying on your parents and the people around you to help solve your problems for you. And you decide, I'm going to solve my own problems. I'm going to become my own hero. I'm going to try to become like the guru instead of just rely on the guru. And you're going to become like, you know, Christ or like God. I mean, one of the things that they discuss in a Christian perspective is, I think it's Matthew 6:18, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But it's, become perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And what they're discussing there is like the whole point in the game of life is to seek for, know, and strive to be like God. So we become like the Creator as time goes on, which means that we have to be willing to let go of who we are in the moment. So Frodo, the whole point I'm leading up to here is that in the Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Frodo is, you know, he's uncertain of himself. He doesn't know if he can even do the challenge that lays before him. I mean, you can imagine it's like, you know, going to Mount Doom is like, you know, think about, let me see if I can phrase this. Think about the most draconian, oppressive, like Nazi type regime you can imagine, where everybody around you is a potential enemy, where there's no compassion, no love, no joy. And you got to go directly into the heart of that place and throw, you know, cast this thing that they're all looking for into the lake of fire, into this place where it will get destroyed. I mean, it's a pretty darn challenging thing to do. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never fought in any wars. I'm not a veteran. I can only imagine what it takes to do something like that. So Frodo's going through this whole part of being willing to let go of who he is now, which is this kind of innocent, childlike being, so he can become the hero. And he has many instances in the caves of, I forget the name of it, the dwarfen like kingdom in there, Mithras maybe, but he goes into these caves and he has to go where there's like ghouls and there's, you know, nasty creatures trying to find him because he's got the ring, and he learns that he can actually defend himself to a certain extent. And he has to rely on his friends and compatriots, because that's the other beautiful thing, is that this journey of life isn't just about you doing it and you're totally alone and you have to just be like this solemn monk wherever you go and you never talk to anybody. No, we're here to do it together. That's the whole point. We're in fellowship together. A symphony is not one instrument and nobody else. A symphony is a bunch of different instruments all playing one song together, the universe's song. Music is a really good analogy for this whole like coherent narrative. So that's kind of the stepping outside of the Lord of the Rings analogy. You have to be willing to let go of who you were now so you can embrace who you are becoming. And often when that happens, you experience catharsis. Catharsis is all about, it's the emotional experience of transcendence. So we have a hope to gain these tools and powers and this wisdom. When we use coherent philosophy, we're using truth seeking. We bravely face the truth of our own lives and our experience. And then that activates the neocortex in the brain, that funnels all that fear, anxiety, energy into the brain, the forebrain and the midbrain. That's where we derive meanings. And the ultimate meaning generating source, the thing that has the power to weave all meanings together, is the one infinite truth. And at the head of that one infinite truth is a true concept of the divine creator, the substance of the divine creator. That's the kind of thing, the magic that holds it all together, the epicenter. That as an image, you know, how much time do I have here? Okay, I got about 15 minutes. I'm going to try to wrap it up and see if there's any questions here in maybe the next 5 minutes. But let me show you this. I did an episode on this. I did an episode of this on my show Into the Storm on edgeofwonder.tv. In Star Wars, there's a really cool allegory. I know some people are like, Star Wars sucks, but there's really awesome like allegories and symbolism in that film that you can use to see how this grand perspective is working. Oh, look at that. That's actually my image right there. That's funny. All right, so yeah, let's pull it up. Why not? All right, hold on one second. Let me just pull up that image. This is actually from a talk I gave way back in 2014. It's funny that sometimes you find your own images on the internet sometimes. So let's see. Let me pull up the share screen. So this is a circumpunct, and a circumpunct represents many different things. So this is one of these like we can call it multi-dimensional symbols because it has many different meanings depending on the thing you're trying to apply it to. And so the circumpunct is a circle with a dot in the center. Now the dot is meant to represent, with respect to how do you create a coherent narrative, the circumpunct, the dot in the center is the creator, the source. And the outside part is wisdom. That's the part, all the truth that you've been able to accumulate in your life. And the black part in the middle, that's the truth that's in you that either you don't know about yet, or you do know about, but you've chosen to reject for some reason. So I call it the shadow of the unknown. There's the shadow that we put things in the shadow, which then creates pain, suffering, loneliness, things like this. Or we embrace our shadow and we pull from that shadow light. From darkness comes light, if you've heard that phrase before. So that's the creator concept is the way that we do that. Within the creator concept is the ideal version of you, your higher self. For human beings, when you think about the creator, when we think about this idea of worship or prayer, it's not about like just supplicating yourself to this concept of God. So it's like you just repeat these words a million times, and it means nothing to you, but you're doing it because you were told, and if you don't do it, you're going to get scolded from your religion. No, that's not what worship is really all about from a phenomenological perspective. What worship is about recognizing the beauty and the coherence of the truth around you, and just taking a moment to appreciate it and admiring it. And when you admire it, you become like the thing that you admire. And this is why admiring heroes in life is really important. Because when you admire good heroes, again, for me, I'm just going to use myself as an example. When I admire the works of Jesus in the Urantia book, or the race Ra in the Law of One, which talks about all this wisdom from fifth density, they call it, or sixth density, excuse me, then I'm admiring how, man, these guys have really got it down. To use an analogy, musician, I play some guitar. I'm not the best guitar in the world, but a guitarist in the world, but I play guitar, and when I want to figure out like who can I learn from with respect to guitar, I'm not going to find a bad guitar player who can barely play a song. I'm going to find the best that I can reasonably, work with and try to learn from them. And so that's the power of a role model in our lives. So this is a circumpunct. That's part of what it represents. So let's see, we got about 10 minutes left. So I'll just to wrap it up, guys. So
yeah, we got 10 minutes left, and I would love for you to take some questions afterwards, if you would.
Certainly, yeah. I'm going to just finish my thing, and then we'll go right into some questions.
There you go.
So in summing everything up, guys, we have the adventure of life. The grand adventure, I like to say, is you as an embodiment of the creator. You have been given the powers of the creator, the powers of God, basically, in your own life. It's called free will. And when you choose to create a coherent narrative of truth, when you seek the truth and you formulate true knowledge and you expand your knowledge and your awareness beyond the limits of what you know, then you get to literally recreate the infinite truth that's all around and inside us within your own consciousness. And what's interesting about that is that creates a pattern in your brain, in your mind, both energetically and physically, that then your heart, which is a liquid crystal oscillator, every time your heart pumps, it's compressing the blood in that heart, and it sends an electric charge out. And that charge, that field, the information in that field is being informed by your pattern generating brain. And so the brain and the heart, they work together. When they're in coherence, you form a beautiful coherent field. You can actually measure this with Kirlian photography and auric fields and things like this. This isn't like, woo-woo stuff. That modern science knows about this. And when you do that, you create a bioelectric field that changes the atoms of your own body. your body is made of atoms and your DNA is made of atoms, and those atoms are electrical objects, and those electrical objects are affected by your bioelectric field of your heart. So when you take the time to seek the truth and you use the concept of the creator as the ultimate order making way to recipe to take all that true knowledge you've been accumulating and turn it into a coherent narrative, the many become one. You create a stillness in your own storm of life, and then you will experience healing, you will experience joy, you'll be able to create beautiful relationships for yourself and your family and the world around you. And that's literally how we create the so-called golden age, or the kingdom of heaven on earth, or as Star Trek likes to show it, we create this age where we're no longer seeking money to satisfy our own base desires because we live in a hard world and we just want to escape. We're seeking to serve and propel the concept of what it means to be alive forward, and we all want to work together to do that in a beautiful, awesome, amazing family relationship. So there you have it, everybody.
Wonderful, wonderful. I got a question for us.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a lengthy one. I'm gonna try to shorten it down a little bit. It's from Eric's. It says, does the brain really store all this information and memories, or could it be a biochemical, mechanical interface for retrieving this information from the ether? That's first part of the question, I guess.
Okay. The answer is yes on both counts. So the brain, there's this concept called reflectivity. So it seems like with respect to information storage, at every place, that level, there is a desire for whatever reason the creator wanted to kind of create a representation for all of that. So in your brain, you do possess a somewhat of an information storage capacity that's really related to your body, because your body's like its own organism. It wants to figure out how it's going to do things. And so your brain is going to store the information that your body needs to do various things in the world. But that's not the total storage. I would argue that a lot of the information is stored in your bioelectric field, which radiates anywhere from 6 feet to 12 feet, 30 feet, 60 feet out from your body. And then that interconnects with the geomagnetic field, which is supposedly where the kind of earth grid or consciousness grid is. And then that connects with the solar, and so it just keeps going and going. And it seems like electrical energy, at least at below the speed of light, is a part of that information storage system. And then higher beyond that, I'm sure Dan got into this, is the more deeper fields of consciousness and spirit where information is stored as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there was a second part to this, and that is what you just said, plus or minus processing this information and then manifesting the 3D response in the body, i.e. a terminal that interface with collective web and all that is. So I think my interpretation there is that all accessible so we can create it, recreate it, or create it in the physical also from that source?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as an analogy, it's not actually technically correct to say that you forget things. Like all the experiences you've ever had are actually still there, even in your meat suit, your brain. But what you tend to lose is the connection to them. And that's why, when you pick up an old object, you got a bunch of, knickknacks in your house from your childhood, and you pick it up and you're like, you could stare at it for like a half hour. It's because you're reconnecting the information channels. So that as an analogy for what you were just mentioning, yeah, I think it's all there and part of the game of life, and part of the benefit of having this coherent model is to reconnect with that field of information.
Yeah, I think memory is placed in many different places, like you said, also what people call the Akashic records. That is, I guess every level of existence has its library. Here in 3D, we get libraries, and they're called libraries.
Right.
So, same thing at the different levels up in vibration, and we can access some of those if we are able to reach into that vibration through the quantum existence.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yes.
Agree?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there was a question in or a comment in the chat really early. It says, "Do you work with transition?"
Transition, as in
Yeah,
from
maybe
life to death.
some people call it death.
Okay. Uh, well, I'm not sure what they mean by work with transition. I don't, I'm not like a therapist or anything like that.
Yeah.
If that's a question. I mean, I've dealt with those experiences in my life. I would say, I guess, to answer the question generally, that death gets a bad rap, or transition, if we want to use that term. It, in a lot of ways, and this is something I want to say the Buddhists have a lot of information about. Death is something you can experience all the time. It's transformation, really. You know, your beliefs, for example, are snapshots of the whole truth. You know, you believe something, and the belief is kind of like a picture. Yeah, it's going to tell you about what's happening in the scene, but there's a whole lot more in the scene that you're not going to have in that little snapshot you just took. And so the left brain, it likes to break things down, oversimplified into these like really snapshots, which are important because we need that when we're running around doing things. But we need the ability to let those die, or our beliefs give way into bigger and better beliefs, by seeking the truth and all that. And so, you know, the kind of ultimate version of that is the so-called death experience, which you can experience because a loved one or something like that dies, and then you have the ability to experience that through their experience, or you personally experience that. And one of the interesting things that Dan Winter talks about is that when you go through the death experience, your brain and heart have the most coherence you're ever going to have in your life is in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And yeah, we're okay. There's one more question from Yvonne, and she says, okay, Justin, did you go through a boy to man initiation process?
Not a socially, or not a cultural one.
No.
You know, unfortunately, and especially in the West, we don't have those initiation rites anymore. We tend to think of them as
Yeah.
primitive, or, you know, brutal or whatnot. And believe me, there's not nice ones out there for sure. But you know, I guess the closest thing I had was I was in Boy Scouts for a couple years, but even that wasn't really like a decent one. But the point is that I had to kind of initiate myself a few years ago when I
Yes.
discovered I wanted to become a father and start a family. I started to think about that, and I'm like, boy, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I had to come to grips with the fact that I really wanted to be way more prepared. I mean, thankfully, I don't have any children yet, but I encountered the idea before I had the experience, which is not always the thing that men can do necessarily. But I decided to think about, like, what would I do if I was in that role, and what would I teach, and how would I handle the challenges. And boy, I realized I didn't know a lot. And I started researching a ton of stuff, and I actually incorporated a lot of that research into my work. But my point is that I think male initiation at its core is about your willing choice to embrace um, your own lack of wisdom and lack of development. You have to look in the mirror and be like, I don't have it all figured out. There's
Yeah.
more to know. Is there someone or something out there that can help me if you want that experience, which I think is a lot of benefit. The social initiation is really important, especially for men. And actually embrace that. And that's kind of what I've done over the years, is I've really tried to be humble and recognize where I have something to learn, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Deciding to have children, that is an initiation into a different form of life, because we got to remember there is no owner's manual that comes with those kids. And we're just kind of running, you know, by the seat of our pants. And sometimes we really don't know what we're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that's an initiation. All right. And I see now that we are getting up on a little break here, a 20-minute break before the next speaker, which looks like it's me. Okay. So I sure thank you very much. Justin, this is, you are talking on a higher level of consciousness than most people I run into. I really love this. This was great.
Thanks, Augie. Thanks, everybody. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I wish you well in your travels and your adventures. Much love.
Thank you.
That was great.
Alright.
Justin is always so amazing with his info.
Oh, he's phenomenal, man. This
Mhm.
was a really high level consciousness talk.
Yeah. And I love like the way these conferences intuitively just come together with the schedule, because it's really like every speaker is just peeling back even more layers, and we're just going deeper into the subject, you know?
Yeah.
Hmm.